I belong to two gyms. I know that probably isn't obvious to anyone with eyes, but yes, I have two separate gym memberships. I pay an extraordinary amount of money every year to belong to these two establishments. Have these expensive memberships changed my life? No. Why? When you join a gym, you're supposed to go to the gym. Claiming publicly that you belong to a gym but then never showing up doesn't mean a thing. It's kind of like Miley Cyrus being baptized in the Southern Baptist Church. Sure, she's an official member, but that's where the involvement stops and the twerking begins. It's been a couple of minutes and I haven't even brought up Hitler yet, so let's solve that problem. Not to compare Miley to Adolf, but Hitler was raised in a Catholic environment and never technically left the church. He may have belonged to the Catholic community very early on in his childhood, but there is no evidence to suggest that he was ever a practicing Christian. Ever. Anti-Christians and leftists try to use Hitler's upbringing in quotes like, "I believe today that my conduct is in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator, and my feelings as a Christian points me to my Lord and Savior as a fighter," to discredit the faith. Yes, he absolutely did say things that were sort of Christian-y, or at least Christian-esque, but he's saying those things in the same way that I fervently announce that I'm definitely going to the gym tomorrow. In other words, he's lying. Hitler used Christian imagery and popular phrases for one purpose only. He needed the German Christian voters. Here's what Adolf really thought about church. We do not want to battle against Christianity. On the contrary, we have to declare ourselves to be the only true Christians. This means that we have to throw the entire weight of the party at the saboteurs. Christianity is the slogan under which we will eradicate the preachers, just as socialism was the one under which we destroyed the Marxist bigwigs. He used the German Christians, and many unfortunate people couldn't see through the charade. Historian Friedrich Timme was an exception. He sought to reveal Hitler and the Nazis' faux Christian front by writing in 1933, "To my mind, everyone who believes in their grand promises and indeed in their Christian beliefs is a fool. You should recognize them by the fruit of their deeds, and those fruits are murder, manslaughter, violence of every sort, and ruthless careerism." Ruthless careerism, sort of an odd pairing there by Friedrich. The Nazis are brutally murdering people, and they appear to be too focused on their own career advancement in the workplace. Hitler's plan was to use Christianity so he could distort Christianity. In 1939, he established the Institute for the Study and Eradication of Jewish Influence on German Church Life, or ISEJIGC for short. He used this to change the Christian churches from within. The Institute was created to institutionalize two fabulous new doctrines. Number one, the Old Testament is garbage because it was written by Jews. And number two, Jesus was in fact not Jewish. The Nazis came to believe that Jesus was appropriated from the long-forgotten Germanic god Christ, and that the Bible was actually written in German, and that the New Testament took place entirely in Germany. An SS member, Karl Williget, just happened to stumble upon these lost facts. He later was committed to an insane asylum for obvious reasons. Hitler came to realize that changing the Christian churches by simply rewriting its history and allowing them to operate was not going to work. He proclaimed, in the long term, National Socialism and the churches won't be able to coexist. His outlook on transforming the churches became even more bleak over the course of the war. In December 1941, Hitler remarked, "The war will run its course, and then I will see it as my life's work to sort out the problem with the churches. Only then will the German nation be safe. I do not care in the slightest about articles of faith, but I'm not having clerics sticking their noses in worldly affairs. This organized lie has to be broken in such a way that the state becomes the absolute master." What a Christian! Hitler's solution? Quote, "The best thing is to let Christianity gradually fade out. A long phase out has something conciliatory. The dogma of Christianity will collapse in the face of science." It's clear that Hitler was not a fan. You see, Christians believe in a power higher than themselves, a power even higher than the state, and that's what Hitler had a problem with. Nothing was higher than the Nazi state to him. Oh, and all that love your neighbor as yourself and thou shalt not kill stuff was kind of getting in the way, too. Does it sound like someone who's on the record calling Christian churches, quote, the most terrible institution imaginable is a person of profound faith? I don't think so. And just to clear up any confusion, the last quote is by Hitler, not Miley Cyrus. So, to review, Hitler proclaimed pro-Christian sentiments that he didn't believe. Hitler proclaimed anti-Christian rhetoric that he steadfastly did believe. And I proclaim that I am going to the gym right after this. I don't even believe me anymore. Always remember, it's polite and important to begin conversations with questions that aren't controversial. Luckily, I'm both polite and important. So, were Nazis environmentalists? Nazis were a lot of things, sure. They were most famous for their murderous tendencies, but in many ways, they were also the environmentalists of the day. Now, that does not mean today's environmentalists are racist, want to kill all the Jews, or want to bring back the mustache that only Hitler and Michael Jordan can pull off. And if you're one of the 8 people who actually needed to hear that disclaimer, screw you for wasting our last 15 seconds. Much of the 1960s and 70s overpopulation scare shared large parts of its concerns with Hitler. Both movements were obsessed with the idea that they could not produce enough food to feed the increasing numbers of people. Population will inevitably and completely outstrip whatever small increases in food supplies we make, as environmental legend/crazy person Paul Ehrlich put it. Of course, it's not as plausible to find new space to grow food when you're talking about the whole planet. Hitler only cared about Germans and could solve this problem by gaining living space to the east. The book Hitler Ascent quotes Mein Kampf's first volume, noting Hitler's belief that the new Reich would have to conquer with the German sword the soil that the German plow would till in order to provide the people with their daily bread. Hitler's desire for living space was specifically to secure adequate food supplies for the German people. How important was living space? Hitler's 2 most important goals, the destruction of Jewish Bolshevism and the conquest of living space in the East. Despite all the tactical flexibility and political maneuverability he was to show later in his career, Hitler always insisted on these 2 goals with dogmatic rigidity. The BBC wrote about the movement that influenced Hitler, including the growing concern about the allegedly negative effects of industrialization and urbanization. There is also a belief in the virtues of agrarian society and the panic over Germany's limited resources of food and raw materials. The only thing keeping those quotes off a Prius bumper sticker is that they're too long. The environmentalists of the day certainly noticed the Nazis' green efforts. German conservationist Wilhelm Leinenkämper wrote that the Nazis refuse all kinds of compromise and demand strict, literal fulfillment. Those refusing the call of sacrifice are under attack, and rightly so. Sounds like something you'd hear about those evil climate deniers today. The book The Green and the Brown by environmental professor Frank Ukoetter dives into the debate as to why environmentalists were so enthralled with Nazis. Much of it was an ability to overlook the nastiness of the regime to get their desired outcomes. But the similarities to modern-day environmentalism are unmistakable, as Ukoetter sums up nicely. The lion's share of conservationist publications between 1933 and 1945 could be printed again today without raising eyebrows. The Nazi policy of Dauerwald, or eternal forest, was a nationwide, top-down, sustainable forestry program that was a passion project of one Hermann Goering. Long before he sampled the sweet taste of cyanide, he said, quote, "Only by the complete subjection of the individual to the service of the whole can the perpetuity of the community be assured. Eternal forest and eternal nation are ideas that are indissolubly linked." Does that sound right-wing to you? For many of today's environmentalists, the Nazi eternal forest program is as impressive as a yummy glass of lukewarm kombucha. Ironically, then we might conclude that it was the Nazis who pioneered the application of ecologically aware forestry in Germany. But is this assessment correct? The book rightly points out that when the war ramped up, the Nazis clearly prioritized the military over the trees, but, quote, I would argue that this policy left a long-term legacy for the German forest that was ecologically beneficial. Jonah Goldberg also outlined the regime's similarities when it came to these areas in his book, Liberal Fascism. Heinrich Himmler was a certified animal rights activist and aggressive promoter of natural healing. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, championed homeopathy and herbal remedies. Hitler and his advisors dedicated hours of their time to discussions of the need to move the entire nation to vegetarianism as a response to the unhealthiness promoted by capitalism. A Hitler Youth Manual proclaimed nutrition is not a private matter. Organic food was inextricably linked to what the Nazis then described as the left does today as social justice issues. The one environmental issue that you don't see Hitler all that concerned about was global warming, which is odd considering the Earth warmed about 0.7 degrees Celsius between 1910 and 1940, just slightly less than the entire amount of warming that has occurred in the last century. I guess the world had more pressing issues to deal with back then. Of course, for those 8 annoying people waving their fists at the screen, this again does not mean that Al Gore is actually just a somewhat well-preserved Adolf Hitler. Nazis were environmentalists, but they also believed in terrible things like killing all the Jews and massive government control of every aspect of your life. For today's environmentalists, to quote the Meatloaf, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So to review, the environmentalists of the second half of the 20th century sound a lot like the Nazis of the first half of the 20th century. The Nazi conservationism, combined with all the government power needed to implement extreme sacrifice and regulation, won over the environmentalists of the day, and still impressed as many. And I didn't talk too much about Hitler's well-known vegetarianism, partially because it may not be completely true. According to the Telegraph, although he referred to meat broth as corpse tea, gotta love that, he was not fastidious about declining meat. Dion Lucas, his cook before the war, claimed he was a fan of stuffed pigeon, and he was also known to be partial to Bavarian sausages and the occasional slice of ham. The worst part about that is that I'm a vegetarian that does not eat stuffed pigeon, technically making me more extreme than Adolf Hitler. I think I'll keep that one off the resume. Bernie Sanders is passionate about a lot of things. Socialist utopias, raising the minimum wage, growing hair in places where you should not have hair, and of course, energy efficiency.
If we move to energy efficiency, if we are aggressive about wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, and other emerging sustainable technologies, this small state can lead America in a new energy direction and lead the world in that direction.
In 2014, Bernie actually got his wish. The 42-year-old Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant was shuttered, and everyone was happy and healthy, and the planet was a better place because of it. Good night, America. Just kidding. There's more to the story. When the nuclear power plant closed, another environmental activist, Bill McKibben, confidently wrote that Vermont was completely capable of replacing its power output with renewables. That's certainly a nice, happy, green thought, but that's not exactly what happened. Vermont Yankee's power supply was replaced with something else, natural gas. The thing about natural gas is that it sounds pure and clean, but it's still a fossil fuel that releases, CO2. What happened? Did the New England area continue to experience the annual decrease in emissions it was accustomed to with a switch to natural gas? In a word, no. The region saw a 5% increase in carbon emissions, the first year-to-year increase since 2010. The jump from 28 million tons of carbon emissions to 30 million tons was blamed by some on the cold winter of 2015 and the uptick in the use of electric heaters. I mean, it's not like New England ever gets cold in the winter every single year. That never happens. No one could predict that. The real reason the area saw a 5% increase in carbon emissions was because Vermont Yankee was no longer in operation. What happened with Vermont Yankee is not a freak accident or an isolated incident. Carbon emissions are increasing all over the country in the name of decreasing carbon emissions. When one power station in Wisconsin was shut down in 2012, emissions rose by 6 million tons, a more than 15% increase in the area. And that's nothing When another nuclear power station closed in California in 2012, emissions increased by 24%. I feel like I'm beginning to see a trend here. You see, people like Bernie Sanders forget that nuclear power is largely carbon neutral. It's clean and can operate 24/7 because it doesn't depend on the sun or the wind. It's pretty much an environmentalist dream, a dream that is falsely labeled as a nightmare. As of right now, 7 more nuclear plants are scheduled to close between now and 2025. According to data compiled by the Energy Information Administration, these closures could result in an increase of 30 to 46 million more metric tons of CO2 into the environment. The whole thing seems pretty counterproductive, if you ask me. Why would anyone with a brain take away a technology that accomplished the very thing they set out to do? I'm looking at you, Bernie. And that's why getting rid of nuclear power, a zero-carbon power source, in order to make room for nicer-sounding, less dependable renewables, is a major green fail. The sky is falling. Do you know the chickens that believe that in the story get eaten? Yet the environmental belief of a falling sky due to our SUVs has become sacrosanct in our society. Question it and become the equivalent of a Holocaust denier. The main chicken predicting the falling sky is none other than Al Gore, a man who has been a complete liar every second of his life for at least as long as I've known he's existed. When you lie a lot and get caught a lot, you tend to find justifications for your behavior. And Gore has been doing that quite a lot. Recently, he's come to claim that his scare tactics from his B-level horror film, An Inconvenient Truth, have been vindicated. If he wanted to do a monologue about every time we caught Al Gore lying, this would not be a once-a-week show. It would be multiple simultaneous live 24/7 networks. But this particular lie is so supernaturally disingenuous, the architecture must be highlighted. What Gore has been talking about is Superstorm Sandy, a storm so super it wasn't really a hurricane anymore before it hit the East Coast. The storm caused upwards of $70 billion in damages, not because of its strength, but because of where it hit. New York City, you know, the place that contains the low-lying island where we store most of our tall buildings. Let me paint the horrifying picture for you. In less than an hour, a 13-foot storm surge deluged the city, swallowing everything below Canal Street. The Battery was particularly devastated. Docks were destroyed, and ships were swept onto streets. Further uptown, a bridge that connected Harlem to Ward's Island was washed away, and somewhere in Chinatown, the East River likely met the Hudson. Oh, actually, sorry, that wasn't about Sandy at all. It was a story about the Great New York Storm of 1821, long before there were SUVs. Gore's reaction to Sandy was less mourning for the victims and more celebrating his own brilliance. Not incidentally, you have to be a special kind of douche to use human tragedy to prove yourself right. And that's why Al Gore is a vaunted member of the Douche Hall of Fame.
Douche Hall of Fame.
Here's what he said. The single most common criticism from skeptics when the film came out focused on the animation showing ocean water flowing into the World Trade Center memorial site. Skeptics called that demagogic and absurd and irresponsible. It happened last October 29th, years ahead of schedule. Over the past few years, Gore has peppered his mindless followers with version after version of these comments, all with the same story. In An Inconvenient Truth, I predicted New York City would be underwater. Superstorm Sandy proved me right. And since it happened sooner than I predicted, global warming is even worse than I've been telling you. We are totally screwed. As you might imagine, the kind of person who shows up to see Al Gore speak eats this up without any challenge. Gore knows this, of course, which is the only reason he even attempts it. Because anyone who actually bothered to watch his movie would know he was lying. It's true that Gore predicted the flooding of New York. Here's the clip.
This is the World Trade Center memorial site. And after the horrible events of 9/11, We said never again. But this is what would happen to Manhattan. They can measure this precisely, just as the scientists could predict precisely how much water would breach the levees in New Orleans. The area where the World Trade Center Memorial is to be located would be underwater.
Did I mention that you have to be a special kind of douche to use human tragedy to prove yourself right? And that's why Gore is a vaunted member of the Douche Hall of Fame.
Douche Hall of Fame.
Gore's tactic of using 9/11 to scare people about the weather is tasteless to an almost inhuman level. But hey, he did predict that New York would flood, right? With a prediction like this, there are three elements we need to focus on. The what, which was the flood in this case. We'll look more at that in a second. Then the when. He admits himself that he was wrong on that. Most importantly, though, is the why. Why did he say New York was going to flood? Amazingly, he tells us the why and proves himself a liar in his own movie. Watch.
If Greenland broke up and melted, or if half of Greenland and half of West Antarctica broke up and melted, this is what would happen.
So why was New York going to flood? Not because of a storm of any sort, because of a breaking up and melting of all of Greenland and or West Antarctica. Can we get an overhead? Is there any ice left on Greenland or West Antarctica? Weird. It seems like there is. What Gore predicted was a global 20-foot sea level rise caused by global warming-induced complete melting of the Greenland ice shelf. When he said that, even his scary source material, the United Nations IPCC report, was predicting about 11 inches of sea level rise, not 20 feet. At the time, they only had, quote, medium confidence of, quote, partial melting of Greenland over, quote, a period of time ranging from centuries to millennia. And even if all of that happened, it would only be half of what Gore was predicting. When he said he predicted the flood, he's lying about that too. What he predicted was not a temporary flood, but a permanent one. 1 week after Hurricane Sandy, about 600,000 people in the United States still didn't have power. That surely sucked big time. But in Gore's prediction, 100 million people would be displaced from their homes permanently, never to return. Where do I get that fact? In his movie, more precisely, the exact sentence directly before the clip of the movie he wants people to watch.
Think of the impact of a couple 100,000 refugees when they're displaced by an environmental event. And then imagine the impact of 100 million or more.
Think about the balls of this guy for a second. It's not like you'd have to check complicated hurricane studies to prove he is lying. It's not even like you'd have to look in another part of his movie. It's amazing. This guy is directing people to his movie to prove his prediction is correct, when he knows that the previous 70 seconds of footage proves him to be a liar. And he is so sure that his audience is a bunch of blind, mindless followers and will believe anything he says without double checking, that he does it anyway, over and over and over again, speech after speech after speech. And the worst part is he's right. They applaud like a bunch of lemmings and go home and feel wonderful about themselves and their wonderful levels of purity and service. So to sadly, pathetically review, Gore is lying about being right about predicting flooding in New York. The evidence is his own words in his own movie. And did I mention Al Gore is a vaunted member of the Douche Hall of Fame? I have a confession to make. I think Gwyneth Paltrow is a decent actress. In Iron Man, Shallow Hal, The Royal Tenenbaums, come on, these are good movies. But these days, she seems more occupied with managing her health and lifestyle brand, Goop. Really the name. Goop is concerned with all things that have to do with wellness, whatever that means. Like this story, for example. What fruits and veggies have the most pesticides? The Dirty Dozen is here. The Dirty Dozen list goes on to describe the foods with the most amounts of evil, no good, dastardly pesticides. Goop is off to a good start, but I've compiled my own list to give you a more thorough answer to what fruits and veggies have the most pesticides. It's time to get antisocial. According to Goop's list, apples, delicious apples, are one of the most pesticide-ravaged fruits you can eat. In fact, apples were found to have 47 pesticide residues by the USDA and the Pesticide Action Network, which is apparently a thing. But those are just some of the pesticides. In actuality, apples have even more than that, like caffeic acid, chlorogenic acid, and the even much newer, more dangerous and downright racist neochlorogenic acid, just to name a few. But those aren't synthetic pesticides. No, those are natural pesticides. And it's not just apples. Every single fruit and vegetable makes its own natural pesticides. That's right, even if you pay 300% more for those organic apples, you still get the pesticides that come with it. The word pesticide gets a bad rap anyway. It just sounds bad, like homicide or suicide or genocide. But what does pesticide really mean? Pesticide is any chemical, natural or human-made, that is designed to kill another organism, in this case, a pest. Something that ruins your food. Let's take a moment to remember something quickly. Produce has been around longer than whole foods. I know it's hard to believe, but plants have always naturally produced their own antibiotics to kill threatening insects and other organisms without any help from us. If they didn't, they wouldn't be around now. In the last few decades, we've learned to improve upon the process with synthetic chemicals. But let's not forget who started this deadly biological war: plants! The pure, natural, healthy foods you love, like cantaloupe, apricots, and cauliflower, and even kale, actually are the ones to blame for the pesticides now infiltrating your body, those bastards. According to research by Dr. Bruce Ames, professor of biochemistry and molecular biology at the University of California, Berkeley, such a conservative institution, 99.99% of the pesticides consumed in the American diet are chemicals that plants produce to defend themselves. 99.99%. The amount of natural pesticides present in our food absolutely dwarfs the amount of man-made pesticides. Dr. Ames estimated that Americans eat about 1.5 grams of natural pesticides per person per day, which is about 10,000 times more than they eat of synthetic pesticide residues. We eat about 5,000 to 10,000 different natural pesticides every single day. And just because these pesticides are natural doesn't mean they are nice, wholesome pesticides that promote wellness. Goop. Natural pesticides are way more harmful than fake pesticides. Many natural pesticides are known to cause cancer in rodent testing. In his study, Dr. Ames suggested that it is probable that almost every fruit and vegetable in the supermarket contains natural plant pesticides that are rodent carcinogens. The levels of these rodent carcinogens are commonly thousands of times higher than the levels of synthetic pesticides. And don't even think about cooking those fruits and vegetables. That just increases the carcinogens. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. Until today, you probably didn't even know that you eat approximately 5,000 to 10,000 rat cancer-causing natural pesticides every single day, and you're fine. Besides, trying to rid pesticides from your diet is futile and the definition of unnatural. Uh-oh. And you don't want to be unnatural, do you? No? Do you? Do you? Goop? Do you? The only surefire way to eliminate pesticides from your diet would be to not eat anything at all, ever. I couldn't do it, but judging by your appearance, that's probably what Gwyneth Paltrow actually does. So to review, all plants have natural pesticides on them. All of them. You consume way more natural pesticides than synthetic pesticides, and they are even more harmful than the fake stuff. And if apples are so riddled with nasty pesticides, then why did Gwyneth Paltrow name her daughter Apple? You don't get to give advice about anything when you name your offspring Apple. Unless you're an apple. Ah, those evil drug companies. Why are they so intent on killing us just to score another extra private jet for their personal fleets? Why do they create medications just to slowly incapacitate our bowels and make our pancreas explode? Why do people believe this crap? Let's think of the business model of a big drug company for a second. They spend years and years and billions of dollars developing products with no promise or timeline for success. If they discover something that works, they get bogged down in years and years and years and years and years of bureaucratic red tape. They have a very limited prospective customer base. Very few people without irritable bowel syndrome are buying the drugs created to treat it. And when a product finally gets on the market, they are flooded both with complaints that they should be giving it away for free and with lawsuits claiming they never should have made it in the first place. For the love of your politically correct deity of choice, why do we screw with these people? Drug companies make their money helping us. That's the definition of the pinnacle of capitalism. Take your unbridled greed and sue someone who isn't trying to stop flesh-eating bacteria. Go sue Starburst for giving you far too few of the pink ones. That's legitimate. Just stop discouraging the people who want to make grandma's tumor go away. Let's use an example so unpopular it can only be attempted by someone as unpopular as me. Do you remember Fen-Phen? It was a weight loss drug combo produced by drug giant Wyeth, a company since folded into Pfizer. Fen-Phen was pulled off the market after a Mayo Clinic report linked it to heart valve disease. The finding was based on 24 people. In 1996 alone, doctors wrote 18 million prescriptions for it. How many people had Fen-Phen helped avoid obesity? How many heart attacks did it prevent? How many could it have prevented? A New England Journal of Medicine editorial estimated the benefit to risk ratio at 20 to 1. For every one person who died, the drugs saved 20. Also, they found that while the risk of getting heart valve disease was increased, there was a 5,000% better chance of a non-smoker getting lung cancer. However, not all studies were so optimistic, and the combination of the media, the government, and some real side effects doomed the drugs. Once they were off the market, though, the lawsuits started flowing. To get some cash from Wyeth, you had to show two things. One, you were sick. And two, you took the medicine. What they did not require was for you to provide any indication that the medicine actually caused the sickness. If that decision wasn't bad enough, Wyeth also figured that the constant testing and paperwork would be too much to handle, so they let any qualified doctor do the required echocardiogram and submit the forms. The lure of easy class action payouts and quick settlements literally created an entire industry. Lawyers spent millions in advertising trying to excavate clients. Law firms were created solely to handle Fen-Phen cases, some employing sonographers and buying their own echocardiogram equipment. Lawyers began awarding bonuses to doctors for each time they found someone they could submit to the class action. Law firm employees trained sonographers on how to set the echocardiograph dials to make the tests look as bad as possible. One Dallas attorney even set up his own echocardiogram company. Law firms were holding mass echocardiogram sessions in hotel rooms. Companies developed mobile echocardiogram centers, the Meals on Wheels of heart valve testing. Finally, Wyeth was tipped off by a nurse and began to check the work more closely. The fraud they found hasn't been seen since The Crying Game, which is such an outdated reference. Here's a quick explainer of the relevant scene in the movie.
And now, it's time for an ancient reference explainer.
There's some really pointless terrorism plot that you don't need to know about, but there's a guy and a girl, and they start making out. The guy runs his hand up her skirt, but she stops him, and they do some other stuff instead. The next day, they get together again. This time, she has a robe on. When he goes to remove it, he finds out that she's a dude. And then I think he vomits in the sink or something.
This has been an Ancient Reference Explainer on the Wonderful World of Stu.
Okay, back to the fen-phen fraud. One group of 4,600 claims was examined, and over 60% were disqualified. Another group of 968 claims were examined. 70% were disqualified. One doctor was mysteriously finding more than 12 times the number of victims that they found in a blind study. Of 1,500 claims in a Mississippi group, less than 50 were legitimate. The ringleader of this scam actually made fake medication labels to prove they took the medication. Investigators found people who had actually been fooled into believing they had heart disease when they didn't. One was so convinced that she had unnecessary valve replacement surgery to correct a problem that didn't exist. But no one beats Cheryl Yvonne Barnett. She developed her heart valve problems after taking the drugs for about 4 months in 1989. The only problem was the drugs weren't even available until 1996. Oops. Also, the doctor she said prescribed the medicine didn't exist. And the pharmacy she said gave her the medication was a parking lot. The judge ordered Cheryl and her lawyer to pay about $10,000 in damages for filing the bogus claim. However, I doubt her law firm, O'Quinn, Laminack, and Purtle from Houston, was too worried about it because Cheryl was just one of 3,500 clients they had brought to the fen-phen money party, one of whom won a verdict of $1,013,853,000. Yes, $1 billion. In the end, the whole fiasco cost a reported $21 billion. What was their entire profit on fen-phen before they pulled it off the market? About $200 million, or less than 1% of the litigation lottery they funded. Now, if they can only create 104 consecutive wildly successful drugs with no lawsuits, they'll be even. Yay! Damn these evil drug companies. So, to review, Big Pharma is not out to gouge you for your money and kill you. Profit motives are fine, and helping people is fine. But telling a dude that you're not a dude until they remove your robe and find out that you are a dude is not fine. And if anyone has fen-phen left, I'll take it off your hands. I could use it, as you can tell.
Are you overweight?
Yes,
Big, giant, fat guy?
you bet.
Need to drop a ton or two and need to do it now?
I mean, not a ton.
You don't need exercise. You don't need diet pills. You need to get away.
You don't mean fat camp?
No, you need to go to Venezuela. That's right, the socialist paradise of Venezuela, where you can starve the pounds away. Having a craving from the junk food aisle? Don't worry, there's nothing in the aisle or the store. Need one of life's necessities that capitalism has made commonplace for the rest of the world? Don't worry, it's not commonplace for you. Get ready to burn calories, walking miles and miles to dozens of markets just to find the most basic of needs. Finally locate some food for purchase? Don't worry, thanks to inflation, your money can't buy anything anyway. And even if you somehow get a chance to eat, you'll want to think twice before digesting. Because socialism has blessed Venezuela with only 3 rolls of toilet paper for the entire nation to share. Maybe those worthless Venezuelan dollars have some use after all. When living with the capitalist devils makes you look like this. Just 6 months in socialist Venezuela and you could look like this. It's the weight loss vacation location that you'll never want to leave. Also, you won't be able to leave because you'll almost definitely be murdered. Come to Venezuela, where you literally can't break your diet. This message brought to you by the Tourism Board of Venezuela, who wish to clarify that this man does not actually live in Venezuela. Also, we don't want him here, and we seriously doubt the diet would work for him anyway because he's so fat.
When you think of Ireland, you think of one thing: leprechauns. Bono. The color green. Okay, three things. Northern Ireland has attempted to associate their lush emerald paradise with a vigorous, environmentally friendly, aka green agenda. To get people excited about being good stewards of the earth, the government created Northern Ireland's Renewable Heat Incentive. What a catchy name. The idea is to encourage individuals and businesses to use biomass fuels. Well, at least that sounds like some mysterious, cool, new, environmentally friendly way to power your country, right? Well, no, not at all. Biomass fuels just mean things like wood pellets. Pellets made out of wood. For every 100 pounds spent on wood pellets, they would receive 160 pounds. It sounds like a great way to save the planet and maybe make a few extra bucks. The renewable heat incentive sounded so good that people started buying wood pellets left and right. In fact, people started buying biomass boilers and wood pellets just for the money. Some true geniuses were able to make the government subsidy into a personal passive income stream. For example, one farmer expected to make £1 million heating an empty shed. Another was on track to make $1.5 million heating a couple of empty factories. This is the way these things always turn out. The government designs a system to force people to help the environment, and it winds up costing a fortune, plus making the environment worse. Classic green fail story. The misuse of this environmental program is now estimated to cost taxpayers upwards of £660 million. And the real kicker is that environmentalists wasted all this cash convincing people that literally lighting trees on fire was somehow environmentally friendly. It's not. It's a tree holocaust, and we all know it. And for what? It's not even good for the environment. In the European Union's effort to produce 30% of its electricity from renewable sources by 2020, regulators decided to label wood as a carbon-neutral fuel for the purposes of emissions accounting, which is, at the very best, an alternative fact. Wood is absolutely not carbon neutral. For example, the Drax power station uses more than 1 million metric tons of wood pellets from the U.S. every year. The result? The power station produces 3% more carbon dioxide than coal, and twice as much as natural gas. And you also have to take into account the additional carbon emissions of just getting the wood pellets across the pond from America. Environmentally friendly leprechauns don't make wood pellets just magically appear. And to answer your question, yes, leprechauns are carbon neutral. While some entrepreneurs may have found their pot of gold in Northern Ireland's renewable heat incentive, it has largely been a colossal disaster on par with the movie Leprechaun in the Hood. It's that bad. And you don't even get a rapping leprechaun. Why bother? And that's why this green subsidy is yet another massive green fail. Wind turbines are racist. Let me explain. Have you ever seen a black wind turbine? No. Have you ever seen a brown wind turbine? No. They're all white, every single one of them. But wind turbines aren't just gigantic, racially insensitive, diversity-denying jerks. They have other vices as well. Recently, Seattle's waterfront park decided it would be a good idea to buy a set of 3 wind turbines for around $107,000. The 3 wind turbines, who are all white, if you were wondering, will generate $1.39 worth of electricity per day, or a spectacular $42 per month. Now, that might not seem like a lot because that is the low estimate, to be fair. At peak generation, the turbines will create about, wait for it, over $5 a day, or $168 a month in electricity. At that rate, it will only take about 53 years for the wind turbines to pay for themselves. Well, assuming no maintenance costs, or staffing, or anything else. A city councilwoman summed up the wind turbines' energy production perfectly, along with the reason government is horrible at everything. Quote, "I did not realize they would produce so little energy. I wouldn't have voted for it knowing it was that little." Of course, even these disastrous estimates are just guesses. City officials can't even be sure because, they're wind turbines. They can't predict wind speeds. They aren't God. One other minor issue, even the crappy amount of electricity they were supposed to generate is difficult to live up to when they aren't even turned on. A maintenance issue is preventing them from actually operating. Of course, green energy projects rarely have anything to do with green energy. An operational set of wind turbines was never the intent of City Council. Their main function, according to Nathan West, Director of Community and Economic Development for Seattle, they were built to, quote, "ensure we have a vertical element to draw visitors to the park." To translate, they were built to look pretty. Sure, they'll be able to generate enough energy to illuminate some lights in the park as well when they're finally turned on. But the reality is they are there as a design element that adds to the, quote, "positive aesthetic in the park" and, quote, "symbolizes energy creation." $107,000 to symbolize energy creation. The only thing these wind turbines symbolize is wasted taxpayer money and white supremacy. And that's why the wind turbines at Waterfront Park in Washington are yet another green fail. If you think a roof can't be sexy, think again. Elon Musk has announced Tesla's new solar roof, and everyone I know is talking about it. They're sleek, they're green, they're super durable, and they come in 4 designs: smooth, textured, slate, and Tuscan. Tesla even makes the guarantee that their glass solar tiles are so durable, they are warranted for the lifetime of your house, or infinity, whichever comes first. Lucky for you, you can reserve your new Tesla solar roof for a mere $1,000 right now. But there are a couple things to consider before you take out your credit card. Like the house from A Christmas Story. Let's imagine for a second that the Parker family still resides in this house, and Ralphie wants a Tesla solar roof for Christmas instead of a Red Ryder BB gun for some reason. By submitting their address, 3159 West 11th Street, Cleveland, Ohio, into Tesla's solar roof calculator, we can find out how much a new Tesla solar roof would cost Ralphie. Elon Musk stated that the new Tesla solar roof would actually cost less to manufacture and install than a traditional roof. Electricity, he said, is just a bonus. Let's see if that's true for Ralphie. The upfront cost of the Tesla solar roof would be $51,500. Stop for a moment and think about a working class family like Ralphie's spending $50,000 up front for a fancy glass roof. If one were to re-roof a typical 2,000 square foot home, the cost would be about $12,000 to $15,000. In this case, the Tesla solar roof is over 3 times more expensive than your average roof. Now, you'll also need the Powerwall battery Tesla wants to sell you. That's another $7,000. So how do you even make an argument for this? Almost $60,000 for a roof. Well, Ralphie's roof starts with your money, namely a government-subsidized solar tax credit of $16,000. That brings the actual cost of Ralphie's new roof to just $42,500. But you better hurry up, Ralphie. That tax credit drops from 30% in 2018 to 26% in 2020 to 22% in 2021 to 0% in 2022. And that tax credit is oh so critical because while the Tesla roof does generate electricity, supposedly for infinity, the total amount it's projected to produce is $43,300. You may remember that number as far less than the total amount the system costs. It's only with the government tax giveaway that the roof will technically pay for itself after 3 decades. Grand total benefit? $800, or 27 magical dollars per year. Remember, these numbers are not coming from skeptics. These are the flowery solar roof estimates coming from the companies selling them. A lot could happen in 30 years. Ralphie will be 76. Mrs. Parker will most likely be dead. The sun could explode, rendering the Tesla solar roof obsolete completely. And I guess we'd all be dead. Fudge! So is the cost of a Tesla solar roof really worth it to light the leg lamp? It might be if Ralphie and the Parkers can stick it out for another 30 years, not move, receive free upgrades for life from Tesla, have nothing unforeseen happen, and have the estimates actually be accurate. Of course, the property taxes would also have to stay the same, which they will not. You see, when you throw 60 grand of magic glass on the roof of your $200,000 house, your taxes go up and easily devour the supposed benefits of having the roof in the first place. Not to mention the interest and the opportunity costs lost by giving up all of that money up front. Where else could you have invested that cash? Elon Musk even admitted that this is true. The economics are not yet compelling where housing and utility costs are low and property taxes are high. And amazingly, Ralphie actually does better than a lot of people. A friend of mine used the Tesla calculator to generate how much a solar roof would cost him and got some shocking numbers. The roof alone would cost over $100,000 and set him back with a net cost of $7,400 over 30 years. Even the Tesla website itself is actually telling him he's screwed. So to review, the Tesla solar roof looks pretty cool, but that might be its best feature. While this is really great technology that will probably be worthwhile someday, you basically have to be an activist, a billionaire, or both to install one today. And Elon Musk is now dating Amber Heard. Their union makes perfect sense. She's hot and young, and he's a gazillionaire. But a word to the wise, Elon, be wary. Amber may look sleek and sexy, but she'll just take all your money. In many ways, Amber Heard is Tesla's solar roof.